Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, home of all things stock, investment, and personal finance related. Now for today's video, Anthony Power and I are going to be taking a look at CORZQ, specifically their evolving Chapter 11 situation. On top of that, we've got DMG Blockchain and a number of other recent events in the Bitcoin mining space, so stay tuned. But before we get into today's presentation, take a minute, you guys. Hit the like button. It's a huge help to myself and the channel. It helps get this content to other people who may find value. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join. And let me know in the comment section below if you were able to take advantage of the price action with CORZQ this year, if you're currently holding shares of DMG Blockchain, and your outlook for Bitcoin, specifically the Bitcoin mining companies moving into this year's halving event. Now with that being said, let's get into today's discussion. Okay guys, so that's right. Today's video, long anticipated. We've had a lot of people in the comment sections talking about CORZQ, not only the share price or impressive share price growth over 2023, but also their ever evolving Chapter 11 situation. So we've invited Anthony Power on to give us his take. We just had some big news in relation to CORZQ come out yesterday. On top of that, Anthony, we wanted to get your take on DMG Blockchain, and there's a couple other things we wanted to throw in towards the end of the video, talking about overall price action. Now, speaking of price action, Anthony, I know I texted you this morning. I said, finally, the account's green. Finally, we're going to have a green day for the Bitcoin miners. And it seems that has now reversed. So this is kind of mid-morning on Thursday at this point. But Anthony, excited to get your thoughts, not only on the mining sector overall, but specifically CORZQ to kick things off here.
Yeah, so let's go back 12, 13 months ago, and CORZQ were by far the biggest miner in North America in terms of everything, really, in terms of size, market capitalization, Bitcoin mined per month, hash rate, and as well as having that, they also had a significant sized hosting business as well. And then we saw 2022, the downturn in the price of Bitcoin, the fact that these companies have took on debt. Also, we saw at the same time the energy prices starting to spike. And I think the energy prices was the tipping point for CORZQ. And when you have a number of customers who have agreements for, like a fixed price, and you're saying you guarantee that, and the price keeps going up, and you're not able to guarantee that because it's going to put you out of business. I think that sort of like tipped CORZQ, over the edge. They went into Chapter 11, which is like effectively, it's not like full bankruptcy, but it's sort of like the precursor. So you go into Chapter 11, and you then sit down with your creditors, those companies that you owe money to, those companies that owe you money, and you sit down and you work out a plan, a structure of how to do that, to see if there's any way that you can actually carry on as a business itself. And the company have worked extremely hard for the last 12, 13 months now. They changed management team. Adam Sullivan's the CEO, and got a great reputation in the industry. And it looks like since he's been leading the company, they've managed to get things in order. And what we saw this week was that they actually got approval from the bankruptcy judge for its actual restructuring of its Chapter 11. And so what that means is the company eliminated $400 million of debt, and it looks to likely now, as we've said on previous podcasts, that they're going to come out of bankruptcy or out of Chapter 11 by the end of January. The judge went on to praise them for the recovery for both unsecured creditors and equity holders. So it sounds like a good job all round. And part of the reason for the success is obviously in 2023 we saw the price of the Bitcoin rise. So Bitcoin rose by about 160% during that year. That's going to help companies in that sort of pressure pot there, like CORZQ, like a number of other miners that were sort of close to the edge as well. I think Agro blockchain were, actually announced they were going into Chapter 11, and then by mistake, and then took that announcement away, but they were sort of on a precipice until they managed to solve that by selling the Helios site to Galaxy Digital and restructuring their company. But Core Scientific have managed to mine Bitcoin all the way through 2023, and actually they've maintained a good level of Bitcoin. They were the top Bitcoin miner in terms of production in 2023. They mined probably about 1,000 coins more than Marathon Digital. Now, will that happen again in 2024? No, because we've seen Marathon Digital come through and raise their hash rates, to a current operational hash rate of nearly 25 exahash. Core Scientific's at 16.9, and both companies are going to grow hash rate during this year with orders that they've got placed already. So Marathon are probably going to win the race in 2024, but just goes to show how big Core Scientific are when they were sort of like, overall for 2023 produced 1,000 more than Marathon. The company, once it comes out of Chapter 11, will hope to relist again back on the NASDAQ. And from a shareholder point of view, if you'd have gone back sort of 4 or 5 months ago, I saw many posts, shareholders will only get something like, single digit ownership in what the company would be restructured like because of the amount of debt. But the company have announced that, when it relists on the NASDAQ, the existing shareholders will probably retain about 60% of the company, which I think is a better deal than what they envisaged if you go back a period ago. What does that mean for Core Scientific as a company in size? Core Scientific currently have a value, a market capitalization of about 543 million at today's market price. And when you look at their current exahash, of 16.9, and you look at where they're going to be when they get their order, which is going to be close to 20 exahash, that means they've got a sort of like you can sort of like then start looking at a comparison as to what their peer miners are in terms of value per exahash. So if you take the enterprise value of Core Scientific, so that's add the debt that they've got, take away the cash, they've got an enterprise value of today of around about just under $1 billion. And then if you divide the exahash that they've got, their value per petahash or value per terahash, let's take it down to the basic level, their value per terahash is only $61 per terahash. And when you compare that to say CleanSpark, who we've seen grow massively over the last 3 years, their value per terahash is about 113. If you look at Marathon, their value is 120. So at the moment, Core Scientific have a valuation of half that of Marathon Digital. And bear in mind, Core Scientific own all their sites at the moment, so they've got quite a lot of infrastructure. They've got a hosting business as well. So in terms of valuation, there's some potential there still to go. And when they start, back on the NASDAQ and start, being able to operate as they could prior to Chapter 11, we expect to see some sort of turnaround here in terms of valuations going forward, because at the moment they're looking in terms of compared to peers as potentially undervalued. Not the most undervalued company. There are some that are undervalued even more than Core Scientific, but I'm trying to look at them from a perspective. When you look at that top tier of miner, and you talk about the likes of Riot, you talk about the likes of Marathon, you talk about the likes of CleanSpark, Core are certainly in that bracket at the moment from a production point of view and from an exahash point of view, and they've got some growth to go as well. It's been a good news week for them, and we'll see what comes out in the next 2 weeks. Hopefully, with that relisting back on the NASDAQ, and that gives them more potential for institutional to come in and buy those shares and hold them, because they'll be then part of a number of indices where institutions will have to buy the shares of Core Scientific as they sit on the market. So yeah, good week all round.
Gotcha. Yeah, that uplist is going to be critical to them. And one thing I've learned as an investor, the market hates uncertainty. So obviously they're discounting the Core's or Core Scientific share price based on this uncertainty that's evolving with the Chapter 11 situation. But a great press release, great step in the right direction. Now, Anthony, I know you brought along a couple charts, as you always do. We love the charts. talking about 2023 share price appreciation and then 2024 year to date, which is obviously only a couple weeks. But I thought this might be a good kind of segue between CORZQ. We can take a look at their extremely strong performance in 2023, move into 2024, and then we can start talking about DMG. So why don't you walk us through kind of the tables you brought along and that impressive performance from CORZQ last year?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of red in 2024, so I thought it would be appropriate just to see what happened in 2023, which was literally ended a few weeks ago. And if we look at the first graph there, the actual share performance in 2023 across some of the largest miners in North America, you can see straight away that the majority of them outperformed Bitcoin, and a lot of them outperforming Bitcoin significantly. You take CORZQ, and we've talked about this before. CORZQ went into Chapter 11 in December of 2022, so their share price was really at rock bottom, and it literally was rock bottom. I think it got down to about 4 cents a share, and today it was trading in the $1.20, $1.40. So it's come a massive way from those days. And the brave investors who went in to sort of like look at a speculative purchase at that point in time would have been sitting on like 18 times their investment by the end of the year. But there was a reason for them being at 4 cents a share. And as we saw through the year, and as I alluded to in the previous update, they've gone a long way to getting their house in order, looking at their cost structure, which certainly needed to change the way they were spending money, looking at how to sort of like, tie down better contracts, get rid of some of that debt. So they've made some deals through the negotiation process with some of their creditors. Some of the debt's been converted into equity, and so they're now looking in a better place. So a good year all round. Marathon Digital, we've talked about Marathon, the year they've had. Certainly from a growth perspective, they grew from effectively 7 exahash to treble that by the end of the year. So fantastic story for them. And the share price reflects it, up from 722. Bit Digital, well, we can't stop talking about Bit Digital at the moment because they just keep bringing out great update after great update. Not the biggest miner out there, but certainly one of the biggest miners in terms of HPC now with that $50 million contract. And they had a great year in 2023, so their share price was up nearly 700. And we've got the likes of Bitfarms, Iris Energy, and CleanSpark. And it's interesting those three are there because those three were the sort of like, along with Hive, were the top production performers all throughout 2023 as well. So, people say, is that metric worth considering? How many they produce per exahash? Well, it gives you an indication of what they're doing as a company with their available machines that they're managing. And those 4 companies just seem to eke a little bit more out of their machines than some of the other miners. And it's consistently doing that month after month. Bitfarms had probably the best of the performers, but we're talking small percentages. I mean, Hive were literally a fraction of a cent behind Bitfarms, and then you had Iris Energy, and they had the likes of CleanSpark close behind them. So that 2023 graph shows really strong performance. The Bitcoin price went up, as I said before, I think I mentioned 155% during the year. So a good increase, from an asset category to go 155%. You look at anything else asset-wise, like property, like gold, like silver, none of them could achieve that. None of them could achieve that if you were looking at the 5-year graph. So, Bitcoin achieved that last year, but it did have, a poor 2022 where it dropped to like 15,000 by the end of 2022. So we knew that there was, potentially some uplift, coming around. When you've gone through a bear cycle, the only way maybe after that is to go up. And so, we saw the Bitcoin price, rally up to 155% by the end of the year, reaching that $42,000 mark. And what we've seen in 2024, so we're only sort of like just over 2 weeks into 2024, so 18th today, we've seen the Bitcoin price literally 0.6% down on where it finished at the end of the year. So it's literally, level from an 18-day point. We did see it spike to 49,000 just before the announcement of the ETF, and that lasted literally an hour or so, and then it came back down to 43,000. So there was a very volatile week there, and whether there was some some priced in action there, or the short sellers decided to have a go themselves, shorting Bitcoin and shorting some of these mining stocks. But what we've seen from a mining stock perspective is we've seen the fact that these mining stocks have had a worse time in January than the Bitcoin price. So Bitcoin price is down less than 1%. I think it's about 0.6% when I last looked, literally an hour ago. But look at the mining stocks there on the graph in red, year to date. And, with the exception of Core Scientific, and again, it's that good news from Core Scientific, their stock price is only down 1% from the start of the year. But we can see a number of the stocks there are close to 30%, some are 40% or above down. So even the likes of Marathon, 29% down, Bit Digital, 40% down, Iris Energy, 36, CleanSpark, 36, TeraWulf, 43, Hut 8, 41, and you can go through them. They've all had a pretty torrid time, with the exception of Core Scientific, which is pretty much, this year has mapped where Bitcoin is. So it's, but obviously a lot of retail investors out there saying, "Oh, I've lost my money, But you've got to look at the longer term approach. I mean, if you'd have got invested in Bitcoin mining at the start of last year, and we're still holding some of them stocks, you'd be still sitting fairly pretty on a number of gains in literally all those miners. Yes, we've seen a drop now, but we're seeing the Bitcoin price sort of hover around that 43,000 mark. And we just need to know where the next price action is going to be. I mean, if there's an upturn in Bitcoin price, the miners will follow. And the miners being more volatile, we might see some green shoots. But there's a little bit of uncertainty at the moment. With regards to the ETF, we know that these big investment companies are having to buy Bitcoin at the end of each day to make sure they have sufficient Bitcoin to manage the levels of the investments that they're holding for their clients. So the longer term gains will eventually come round, but I think maybe some of the retail investors maybe need to have a little bit of patience. This wasn't totally unexpected. I mean, we have looking at first graph, had some significant run in 2023, 2024 a little bit subdued, but we know it can turn around in literally a couple of days. We saw that in July. We saw that towards the end of 2023 when stock prices were literally going up 20-30% a day. So this can turn around quite quickly. Not for the faint-hearted. Do your research, and it's a challenging time, but you've got to keep faith.
Yeah, you definitely do, and that's one of the benefits of the Patreon group. I know you just launched, Anthony, is you can get in there, you can talk to other people in the same boat, kind of reassure each other. I had joked in one of our videos at the end of December that times were so good, I went out and bought new sweaters, and one of the comments in these recent videos, somebody was saying, "Don't return your sweaters, they look good." So I'll keep a hold of those. Now, the other update we wanted to get before we close out here, Anthony, and I'm really glad you brought these two charts because it does really paint the picture. Tremendous 23 and a very tumultuous kickoff to 2024, despite relatively flat Bitcoin pricing, which is a bit of a head scratcher. But the other one we wanted to talk about here is DMG, ticker symbol DMGI. This is a smaller miner. Again, a lot of interest in this one. Based here in Canada, they've actually got an operation in Christina Lake, which is very close to where I used to live. And they're really focused on the immersion cooling. This is a hotter area of British Columbia, hotter climate. So they're looking at ways to address the heat to get more efficiency out of their rigs. So a good update from them. And why don't you take us home with this one?
Yeah, I mean, we've been following DMG. I've certainly had them in my analysis for a couple of years now. And yes, they are one of the smaller miners, and they managed to get to that sort of 1 exahash towards the start of 2023, actually. And they had a goal of trying to double it in 2023. That didn't happen in the time frame they looked at. But we've seen this new order come through now. So they've updated the fact that they're going to add 36 megawatts of mining capacity and upgrade the infrastructure to meet this increased efficiency. So what have they gone and bought? They've gone out and purchased just over 4,500 new Bitmain T21s. And that order will itself generate an extra exahash. So if they get those in place, their existing fleet is currently delivering 1.2 exahash. That takes them to 2.2. That's nearly doubled, in sort of like the first part of 2024. And they're going to upgrade, as I say, their infrastructure there. And that's going to mean probably a little bit of downtime. So they took some downtime doing some maintenance works back in 2023, and looks like they're going to have a similar amount of downtime, 3.5 days expected this summer. DMG have actually, if we look at, we don't talk a lot about immersion cooling, and yet some of the miners are using that technology. So we've got the likes of Riot platforms use it at their Whinstone site, and they've got their buildings F and G back up and running after a year down due to the weather, bad weather conditions last December. So December 2022, they had bad storms, and that damaged the buildings there. We've also got the Helios site, which Argo Blockchain house their miners in the Helios site belonging to Digital, and they're all in immersion cooling. CleanSpark have immersion cooling at one of their sites, and it's about it's not a significant amount of hash rate, but it's a reasonable amount of hash rate. So they're obviously doing a lot of work there to see how that works and maybe increase that as time goes by. But actually, DMG were one of the first companies to do a study on immersion cooling, and probably led the way for some of these companies to actually go out and use it. I'm sure that Argo Blockchain and Riot probably had seen the study that Sheldon put together, and they did a study on immersion cooling and the benefits of immersion cooling, and the fact that obviously in these conditions that we talk about, in the warmer conditions and the cooler conditions, you can the heat dissipation that the immersion cooling technology provides enables miners to mine in these challenging conditions, because you've got the fluid there is actually able to enable these miners to operate in extreme weather conditions. So they did the initial study on it, and they said, there's a potential of saving up to 25% in energy costs, and also if you overclock, you could get sort of 25-30% increase in hash rate. So there was a two-pronged attack, and it's not as straightforward as we're going to save 25% in energy and we're going to get 30% in increased hash rate. There's a lot of trial and error to make sure you get the ultimate energy and hash rate to get the best return, because as you increase the hash rate, you're increasing the power. So to get the right level on that curve and to determine the best return, a lot of these miners have obviously spent time doing that. We've never had any sort of real indication from any of the miners about how their performance has been, but it would be interesting to see when one of them comes out. So DMG are now putting the money where the mouth was. They're going to start using or certainly testing it by spring of 2024. And I suppose if the testing goes well, they'll start actually shifting a lot of their machines into immersion cooling. And actually, in one way, if you look at DMG's fleet, it's actually quite an efficient fleet. They've got some of the high-end S19 machines, and now they've gone for the T21 miners. So they don't have any of the old mining machines that some of the other miners have still got on their stock. So yeah, it's a good update. We talked about these smaller miners in the last video, and the challenge they'll have going forward is, yes, they might have the efficiency in machines, and they might have a reasonable level of energy price, but you still need some cash runway. And how do some of these smaller mining companies manage going through that halving if they haven't built up significant reserves? Now DMG itself, they don't have a significant amount of debt on the balance sheet. If we look at DMG and we look at the sort of the value per current exahash, we talked about Core Scientific at 61,000 and CleanSpark at 125,000. If you take DMG's current fleet, you're looking at a value of $35 per terahash in comparison to $61 and $112 for CleanSpark. So actually, from a value perspective, that's really low, and there's only two miners that actually can compete with that, and that's Mawson and Stronghold Mining have actually got a lower value per terahash than DMG. So there's potential, plenty of upside there. I'm not saying for people to go out and start filling up their pockets with DMG shares, but it's something that you need to sort of like pay attention to as one metric and build up your analysis looking at a number of metrics. Again, when they increase their hash rate to 2.2, that's going to effectively, take their value per petahash down to $18,000 a petahash. So again, if you compare that with CleanSpark, when CleanSpark gets to 32 exahash, their value per petahash is 35,000, and you've got DMG at 17 at half that value. So that's a positive look at it. It's not, we're not saying this is what the value's worth. This is what it's effectively cost to generate that exahash from an enterprise value position. So, looking at debt, looking at cash on the balance sheet, and looking at your exahash that you're deployed. So, DMG sit there as, yes, they might be one of the smaller miners, but they have some significantly good metrics about them. They also do a lot of other things as well. So, DMG actually, I believe they sort of like had a lot to do with the marathon pool. I think they created the marathon pool for Mara. They also do things like they also build infrastructure sites for the miners. They'll build facilities. They obviously advise on technology, so they've advised on immersion cooling technology. So DMG, a small miner, built up by Sheldon Bennett, the CEO, but they've got a lot of strings to the bow. So it's one that you sort of want to pay a watching eye to. Do a lot of research on them, and they're going out there and as a small miner to go and put out an order for 1 exahash. It's an interesting move, and let's see if some of the other smaller miners can do the same before the halving, because these efficient miners will probably put them in good space. I mean, it's going to be cheaper energy for a kickoff using these smaller miners. A T21 will use probably maybe 50-60% less energy than an S19. So that's going to save them energy, much needed cost going into the halving itself. So yeah, good update by DMG.
Interesting dynamic to watch, and I know the immersion cooling is very contentious. I've asked a lot of the CEOs about it, and there's very differing opinions. The other theme we've talked about on the channel, Anthony, is the risk to these smaller miners going into halving from a balance sheet strength perspective. But it's interesting that we kicked off the conversation talking about one of the largest miners that's struggling with Chapter 11 concerns. So really, there, as we saw with the ETF, there could be a number of ways that the halving plays out, and there's a lot of different ideas, thesis going into this that we'll see as time evolves. So appreciate the discussion, great charts, great tables, great dialogue as always. If you guys aren't subscribed to the channel, McNallie Money, feel free to join the community. Anthony, I'm racing the price of Bitcoin to 100,000. That's the goal with the community subscriber list here. So we'll see who gets there first. The other thing, you guys, if you're still watching, you found value, hit the like button. It helps get this content to other people who found value. You can find Anthony's Patreon information below. Let us know in the comment section if you're holding Core Scientific, DMG, or any of the other miners, and we'll see you in the next video.